And we're continuing with the third chapter of the Cockatrice Boys. We are learning that Sana can hear messages from the future, or at least 2 days in the future. And one of the ways she does this is by listening to the Colonel's tea kettle. And so she has been called back into his train car to see if they can get more information on the message about picking up the hounds. At the end of 2 hours, all the persons in the Colonel's cabin were red-faced, wild-haired, and damp with perspiration. The room was full of steam, but a tolerably workable method had been evolved, by means of which, with Upfold using the Colonel's dress saber as an aerial, holding its tip against the spout of the kettle, and pointing the hilt in variations of 360 degrees, contact with the Leicester Square headquarters was at last established. Not before some very odd conjunctions, however. A steam of spiky language issuing from the spout of the kettle threw Major Scanty into transports of excitement, and was identified by him as Hungarian. It seemed he had once spent time in that country and had friends there. Indeed, he would have liked to prolong the conversation. "They tell me, Colonel, that there are no monsters at all in their country. Indeed, the continent of Europe is at present free from such a plague as has infested this kingdom. Is that not very singular, sir?" "It would be if it was so, but I don't for a moment believe it," grunted the Colonel, who wanted his lunch. "Why should this island be singled out for special misusage? A most improbable notion. Pray, Upfold, shift the blade and try to find us the correct station." Upfold, frowning, with the concentration required to shift the sword blade, the infinitesimal fraction of a centimeter that would pick up a different wavelength, obeyed, and a pale blue flame ran for a second along the saber to the kettle. A tiny, distant, but crystal-clear voice commanded, "Unloose the tempest. Master, it shall be done. Find the loose connection, destroy it. To hear is to obey." Lieutenant Upfold's concentration slipped momentarily, and a new voice came over. Saturn, it was saying impatiently. "Ring 502, 502. Please adjust your circumference, We have crackle from cosmic dust." Pressing his lips together, knuckles white with steam, Upfold at last found the correct point in the invisible dome of air above the kettle and stood like a statue while Colonel Clipspeak enjoyed a brisk, businesslike conversation with General Grug Pennington, who happened at that very time to be holding a conference with Lord Ealing in Leicester Square Tube Station. "Sir, is it true that you are arranging for dispatch of Gredlin hounds to Willoughby on the Wolds?" Now, how in the world did you know that?" said the General, utterly astonished. "Why, yes, I have the intention of doing so, but how you have received news of the plan I can't imagine, for the beasts have not yet embarked. They came from Hanover, and are to be sent by submarine from Amsterdam, and by canal boat from Harwich to Willoughby. The journey should take 2 days, but the risks are severe, and the chances of their safe arrival are not encouraging. I do not like this at all, Clipspeak. By what means did you get wind of our intentions? Can there be a leak in our security?" "Pray don't be concerned, General. There is no leak. I believe I can assure you it is just that by remarkable good fortune we rescued a Manchester young person who has unusual telepathic and precognitive dexterity. Indeed, it is only because of this that I am able to talk to you. That I am able to talk to you, "Oh, very well, if you say so. But listen, Clipspeak. In case we have more trouble making contact, I want you to take the bell to Scotland. It appears that this whole evil invasion of our island is being directed from somewhere in that locality. The rest of Europe is clear so far." "Oh, indeed, sir. How singular. That is, in fact, what Scanty, but I—" "Don't interrupt, Clipspeak. It is being directed from a command post in Scotland. We have been given 2 possible names, Crook of Devon and Rumbling Bridge. Your mission is to discover this post and destroy it. So after Willoughby and the acquisition of the hounds, proceed northwards. Who we don't know, nor why, but our intelligence is positive that orders are being issued from somewhere in the triangle between Crook of Devon, Rumbling Bridge, and the town of Dollar." "Is there a railway station at one of those points?" Colonel Clipspeak asked doubtfully. "That is for you to ascertain. Possibly the nearest rail point may be Gleneagles." "Thank you, sir." "Do not fail us, Clipspeak. The safety of the kingdom may rest with you, indeed that of all of Europe. The plague may spread. You must set out at once. Do not forget to pick up the Archbishop, who will be expecting you. Yes, sir, said Clipspeak frankly. Over and out. Colonel Clipspeak mopped his brow with his stiff white pipe-clad gloves. Sana quietly prized the lid off and peered inside the kettle. Could you switch it up? Could you switch off? She whispered to the lieutenant. It's going to boil dry. It's just going to boil dry. Thankfully laying down the heavy saber, Upfold switched off the kettle at the wall plug. Major Scanty was trembling with excitement. Then what those chaps in Hungary told us is true, he exclaimed. The main part of Europe has not been troubled with this plague of monsters. It is only our own kingdom which has been so affected. Now why, I ask myself, should that be? I can think of plenty of likely reasons why, muttered the lieutenant. But Colonel Clipspeak has bent on Sana. I can think of plenty of reasons why, muttered the lieutenant, but Colonel Clipspeak had bent on Sana his piercing dark eyes, all the more brilliant for being set deep under bristly thickets of white eyebrow. Now then, miss, it's high time we knew more about you. We knew more about you. All we know is that Aiken the drummer rescued you from this siege city, and that you are his cousin. Yes, sir. My mam and his mam were sisters, but my mam and dad died, you see, and I've been looked after by my Auntie Floss. How did your parents die, child? In a plane crash, sir. We was all a-going together for a holiday in Marbella, with the plane engine conked out. And your parents were killed? Yes, sir, faltered Sana, wiping away a couple of tears with the corner of her apron. And you, how is it that you did not die also? I put on my life jacket, sir, like they told us, and the strap caught in a fig tree as I fell, and by some Spanish chaps lifted me down, and next thing I know, my Auntie Floss Monsoon had come to Spain to fetch me home, because Mom and Dad were dead. Their names were Ted and Emily Blow, sir. Dad used to be a chimney sweep in Newcastle, sir. That was where we lived. So then you went to live in Manchester with your aunt. Had you known her before? No, sir, never. Mam and Dad never spoke of her, but she told me she was a cousin of my dad. Was she kind to you? She was strict, said Sana after some thought. It was having my hands tied all the blessed time that was the worst. And this gift of yours, being able to see and hear events and information before they have come to pass, have you had that always? Oh, no, sir, said Sana simply. Only since the plane crashed and Mum and Dad died. And I hung for 6 hours in that there fig tree. And did your aunt know of your gift? Yes, sir, she didn't like it. I see. Thank you, child. You may return to your duties. It is the most remarkable piece of luck that we should have happened to take her on board, said Colonel Clipspeak. It is the most remarkable piece of luck that we should have happened to take her on board, said Colonel Clipspeak, when Sana had slipped thankfully away to her button polishing. I wonder, though, was it pure luck, mused Major Scanty, or was it preordained? What can you mean? Demanded the Colonel. Did you hear, sir? That singular little passage before Upfold here found the correct frequency for command headquarters. All that idiocy about crabs and some goats and herrings sounded like balderdash to me. No, just the 2 brief exchanges about the Tempest and a loose connection. Can't say I paid it any heed, said the Colonel. It made me think, said Major Scanty. He stopped and rubbed his chin, looking thoughtfully at the Colonel, who was beginning to fill in a large form, muttering to himself, if we are to take on board the Archbishop of Lincoln, we shall need to make certain that all formalities are most duly and carefully observed. But Lieutenant Upfold threw a keen glance at the Major. You mean, sir, when the voice said, unloose the Tempest, and a blue flame ran down the sword blade? I must confess it sent a cold shiver down my spine. Oh, fiddle-dee-dee, snapped the Colonel, hunting among his pens for one that would write. Why, if that was anything at all to the purpose, it was just some meteorological station giving a forecast, probably in Japan. Much good that will do us. I fear you may be right, sighed the Major. But Major Upfold shook his head. Those voices were deuced queer. If you ask me, gave me the shivering habdabs. There was something, he scratched his head. Something not at all the thing about those voices, especially one of them, not like anything I've ever heard in my life before, nor, he added after some thought, anything like I'd ever want to hear again. Oh, go on with you both and leave me in peace, growled the colonel. If we are to leave for Lincoln this afternoon, there's a whole lot of paperwork to be done. Bells ring up, he barked on the intercom. Yes, sir. Send me Quartermaster Gobble, and muster the men for embarkation. Make sure there's none of them left fossicking about on the station platform. We depart at 2 sharp. Yes, sir. What about the men's dinner, sir? Mrs. Churt must serve it in transit. Mrs. Churt won't say thank you for that, remarked Bellswinger, when he had replaced the receiver. You'd best stop polishing buttons, lovey, and go give her a hand. Nodding, Sana laid a folded mess jacket with brilliantly polished buttons on a pile of 15 others and rose to her feet. As she did so, the phone rang again. What the hell? Now what does his nibs want? Mumbled Sergeant Bellswinger, snatching the instrument off its hook. But this time it was not the colonel. Sana, I want to speak to my little Sana, came a high, strident, clearly disembodied wail from the mouthpiece. It sounded as if the phone itself were speaking rather than a real live human being far away. Bless my buttons, whatever can that go? Bless my buttons, girl, whoever can that be? Grunted the sergeant, greatly astonished. And how in the world come she's got on our internal line? Sana had turned white as pipe clay. Her teeth chattered. It sounds for all the world like my Auntie Floss, she gulped. But how can it be? She can't be on the train. Nobody knows what happened to her. I thought she was dead. Sana, come to your loving auntie, wailed the phone. Shouldn't you better speak to her, girl, and ask her maybe where she is, suggested Bellswinger, holding out the receiver. Sana gave him a desperate look. The very last thing she wanted to be back in touch with her Auntie Floss, but she could see that Bellswinger thought she ought to take the call, expected her to do so, and therefore, with great reluctance, she took a step forward, holding out her hand for the mouthpiece. But the instant before she reached it, the sergeant shuddered from head to foot with a violent jerking movement and dropped the receiver, which smashed to pieces on the metal floor. Oddly enough, even after the telephone had shattered, sound continued to come out of it for several minutes, or perhaps the sound came not from the phone, but from the wall and ceiling nearby. Sana, I'm up in the North Country. I want you so badly. Come to your grandfather's house at Glengrief, your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's house. Come, oh come. The voice rose to a frenzied shriek, then faded away. Blimey, gasped Sergeant Bellswinger, picking himself off the floor where he had collapsed after the convulsion shook him. He flopped heavily onto a chair and blew a long breath. Blimey, he said again. That was an electric shock, that was, like a bolt of lightning. Did you feel it, gal? Sana shook her head. No, but I saw you, Sergeant, she said. It was awful. I thought you were a goner, for certain sure. Was that your voice, Auntie Floss? He demanded. Or was that voice your Auntie Floss, he demanded? Or who? If not her, who? I don't know, Sergeant. I suppose it could have been Auntie Floss. After all, I ain't got nobody else. But she never called me her little Sana before. Never. She called me gal, or you what's-her-name. And she never, in her whole life, said she wanted me badly. She never wanted me at all. She only took me 'cause Mam and Dad were dead and there was no one else to take me. She often told me that. She said it was a right pain having to have me in her house, and, said Sana, shivering, if she wasn't killed by the Snark, where is she? In the North Country? Where's that? There's summat pesky rum about it all, grunted the sergeant. But anyway, she's off the line now, and that's just as well. You don't have to answer her. You run to Mrs. Churt, gal, and on your way tell Corporal Knock to come along and repair this here phone. Sana found Dakin with Mrs. Churt, helping chop up spinach. Dakin with Mrs. Churt, helping chop up spinach and sassafras, which had been snatched from the marshes round Manchester under covering fire. It'll have to be soup for the boys' dinner, Mrs. Churt was saying. But thick soup, mind you, so it won't get all splashed about when the train picks up speed. It's lucky I've got plenty of lentils. Now, Sonna, what are you looking so down in the mouth for all of a sudden? I had a message from my Auntie Floss, what we thought was took by a snark. And she weren't after all. Where is she then? Up north, she said. She asked me to go to her, but she never gave no proper address except something about grief. She sounded ever so queer. Well, we are going up north, by all accounts, said Mrs. Churt, for of course news of the troop movements had already flashed about the train like lightning, so you needn't trouble your young head up about that. Maybe she'll get in touch again. Nothing you can do about it till she does. But Mrs. Churt, said Sonna, I don't want to go back to her. I don't like her. I like it much better on this train. She's your auntie, though, pointed out Mrs. Churt. She took you in. She didn't have to. I wish she hadn't. I'd sooner have gone to an orphanage. You can't prove that. You can't prove that, argued Aiken, for you don't know what the orphanage might have been like. Anyway, perhaps your auntie wasn't used to children, suggested Mrs. Churt. I reckon she wasn't. Yes, she did put up with you. You got to remember that. Only just, said Sonna, and I can't think why she wants me back now. I'm not even sure if that really was her voice. It sounded so squeaky and queer. Who else could it have been? Asked Mrs. Churt, unanswerably. Still in all, dearie, you don't have to live with her if you don't want to. Nobody can oblige you, not these days. Sonna nodded in relief, and they got on with making the men's dinner. Then all of a sudden the cockatrice bell, which had been stationary for so long, gave herself a gentle twitch, a slow heave like a cat stretching, and slipped off along the rails in a southeasterly direction. Oh, cried Sonna enraptured. We're moving. We're really moving. Don't get your feathers in a twitch, Aiken teased her. But he too was filled with excitement and joy at being on the go again after remaining in one spot for so long, and all along the train there were loud sounds of soldiers' joy at the prospect of change and action, and new recruits who had come on board at Manchester to replace the men lost in battle were being told by their mates of the pleasures in store. We're rolling, huzzah! Ho, ho, jubilo! The whole train rang with shouts of enthusiasm as it came out of the underground station, and overhead the massed clouds of snarks and telepods who had been circling aimlessly began to concentrate their movements and to make vicious repeated dives at the snaky moving object. Sergeant Bellspringer bustled up and down the corridor, briskly reminding the men that they were now much more at risk and must keep a sharp lookout every minute of the time in case a stray beak or talon or razor-edged tusk or spine penetrated the train's outer armor. Indeed, a swarm of flying hammerheads carried off Ensign Peacecape and Corporal Hunt when they left the train to change the points at Buxton. This made a grim, if salutary reminder of the dangers that surrounded them. Chesterfield was an empty, ravaged city, with not a soul to be seen in its grass-grown streets or among its battered houses. They hurried through without stopping. The bent church spire had bent even more, and a large bicorn was to be seen, twined around it. This made the colonel so indignant that he had a trench mortar fired at it, but this merely dislodged a piece of the square without dislodging the bicorn. Dusk had fallen by the time they reached Lincoln, and the cockatrice bell croaked cautiously and quietly into the station, which had been fortified and made into a kind of castle. Some snarks and telepods had to be dispatched before it was safe for the mayor and corporation to welcome Colonel Clipspeak and his troops, but Lincoln had not suffered so severely as Manchester, and the citizens were in better shape. Stores were waiting ready to be loaded on board. We get supplies smuggled up canals from the coast, explained the mayor, Sir Lionel Dirch. Fish and seaweed. The only difficulty is the smell of the seaweed attracts the foot monsters. That's what we suffer the worst here. They fly upside down, you know, with their foot in the air, and their sense of smell is so sharp one of them can locate a single rotten egg on spurn headlight. The townspeople of Lincoln were so happy to be visited that they arranged a gala reception in the station for the crew of the Cockatrice Bell, with smoked herring roes served on slices of dried turnip, candied salt beans, and a fearsomely potent drink made from distilled seaweed. "Upon my word, this is stingo stuff," said Colonel Clipspeak to Sir Lionel, and he issued an order on the spot that none of his crew were to take more than 2 glasses of it, and Driver Catchpole only 1. The party was a great success. There were more children in Lincoln than in many English cities, due to the fact that the foot monsters, very short-sighted beasts, were unable to see any prey less than 1.5 meters in height, or 42 kilos in weight. In London and Manchester, it was rare to meet anybody under 12, but in Lincoln Station, there were 40 pupils and a mixed junior school waiting to greet Dakin and Sana, who had a fine time describing life on the train to an admiring audience. Meanwhile, Sir Lionel introduced Colonel Clipspeak to his new passenger, Dr. Wren, the Archbishop of Lincoln. Archbishop Wren was a cheerful little round man, more like a robin than a wren, whispered Sana to Dakin, looking along the station platform. "Sad times we live in, sir," said Colonel Clipspeak. "Sad times indeed. But we are delighted to have you as a passenger." "Oh, I don't know, Colonel," said Dr. Wren cheerfully. "I think I'd call them rousing times, a challenge to all of us, and how splendidly you are responding to it." He cast a glance of admiration at the glittering train. "But I understand you have lost a great many of your clergy, Archbishop." "That is true, Colonel, but it puts the others on their mettle, you know. I have some excellent young vicars in homemade snark masks who venture about the countryside putting heart into the people. No, I feel this invasion of monsters is sent to test us, and I sincerely believe that we shall pass the test." He beamed at the colonel and took a large swig of seaweed toddy. "Sir," said Major Scanty anxiously, "I think we should be embarking. We ought to leave before midnight, and I fancy that some of the men have already exceeded their 2-glass ration." "You're right, Major. Bells ring out. Tell Catchpole to sound the recall." Sad farewells were exchanged, and Dakin carried the Archbishop's luggage on board and deposited it in the cabin that Lieutenant Frisbeen had been obliged to vacate. Thank you, my boy," said Dr. Wren, following him. Dakin observed that the Archbishop had a round, domed head, mostly bald except for a fringe of brown hair, and bright brown eyes, and walked with a decided limp. This, he had to explain to Dakin, was due to a poisoned sting of a basilisk, which had cornered him in the cathedral close. "How did you escape it, sir?" asked Dakin, dumping a heavy bag of books. All the Archbishop's luggage seemed to consist of books. "The very best way to elude a basilisk, like the Mercandole, they belong to the same family, is to turn round and stare hard at it over your shoulder. That generally does them at once. It does require some resolution, however, and very often there isn't time," sighed the Archbishop. "The Mercandole, of course, is far more dangerous." Thank you, my boy." He offered Dakin a coin, but Dakin said, "Thank you, sir. We don't really have use for money on the train. In fact, not at all. What I'd really like, sir, if it's not an impertinence—" "What is that, then? Ask whatever you like," said Dr. Wren kindly. "Might I read some of your books?" "My dear boy, of course you may," said the Archbishop, greatly touched. "I know how you feel, for I never travel anywhere without books. Here, have one now." And he fished out The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. "There, that should keep you going till our next stop." "Oh, sir, thank you." Dakin went bounding off down the corridor, like as if his heels were on springs. "Look what he's let me," he said to Sana in the gallery. "You can have a read of it, too." "That's funny," said Sana, looking at the title page. "Now it comes back to me that when I used to get glimpses at your Aunt Flossie's place, sometimes you were carrying a book like that under your arm." And that is the end of chapter 3.